Donald Trump said he's bringing the troops home. Now, this is, amazing that this is taking place under a Republican president. And I don't necessarily know if we'll get the helicopter moment like in Vietnam, where you had the last few troops trying to get on the helicopter in order to get out from Nixon calling it off. But at the very least, it seems that Trump is serious about pulling the troops out of Syria and Afghanistan. So Trump, one of his tweets that I like, and just to give a little more, to be clear, there's a video when Trump said this, when Trump released this, saying we're pulling the troops out, you had people break down on two ways of people saying yes and other people saying boo, and some of the people who were saying boo were supposedly lefties, like Rachel Maddow finding some Russia-backed link that's pushing Donald Trump's hand in this. Even Tom Hartman, that hurt me to watch. God, it hurt me to watch. Tom Hartman going after Donald Trump for this choice, but then giving a caveat, I didn't think we should have been there. But then going back to his Democratic talking point of, oh, I hate Donald Trump for this choice. We are illegally in another country. Let's be very clear. We are illegally, by our own laws and by international law, in Syria. We've occupied that country illegally with force. Donald Trump is saying we're leaving. And just to quote Rand Paul, which he did, fucking A for Donald Trump for quoting Rand Paul, it should not be the job of America to replace regimes around the world. This is what President Trump recognized in Iraq, that it was his biggest foreign policy disaster in the last several decades, and he's right. The generals still don't get that mistake. Rand Paul. I love that. I love that. Now, as this breaks down, however, you can imagine people fracture on different lines. Now, this comes out. Trump told Turkey's Erdogan in December 14th call, it's about Syria. It's all yours, we're done. Essentially saying Trump gets gets annoyed with Erdogan in that conversation, and at some point just says, look, we're done. It's all yours. This creates fracture lines. In this particular fracture line, we have Chomsky and Dore. Now, Dore's perspective is straightforward. Time to get out. Fuck out. We've been there for God knows how long. We've been there for what, 18 years or some insane thing? Or 18 years or something? 17 years, 16 years, whatever. We've been there for decades. It is time to leave. It is time to get out. None of this leaving a force behind. It is time to get out. Now, it must be understood, even with Donald Trump pulling the troops out, he's not really pulling the troops out. Yes, he's pulling an overt level of troops out, but he's still doing drone strikes. He's still giving logistical support. It's still working with some of the terrorists in the region for various things. Yes, it's pulling them out, but it's not necessarily pulling them out. It's both at the same time. That sounds weird, but it is true. There's the optics and there's reality of it. The reality of it is the United States will still have an impact, in some cases indirectly, in some cases directly with air power. But that said, this pulling the troops out, giving them a parade, I'll take it. I'll take it. It's moving the ball forward. I'll take it. Noam Chomsky writes an article where he's making the point of saying, we need to put a small force in. And I'm going to give an explanation for this as Jimmy Dore talks about it. But Noam Chomsky has a certain reason for taking this perspective, even though I think I disagree with Noam Chomsky on this. It's time to come out. I understand the protective mechanism of a certain group in Syria that has developed a station government, and I even understand why Noam Chomsky would be on board for protecting this group with American firepower. But we have been policemen of the world. We have a military budget that's going to nearly in excess of $719 billion. And there's some areas of the country that don't even have clean water. And coming from other countries that have high-speed rail, that have healthcare where the people aren't paying twice or three times as much for, it is time to change the way we go about organizing ourselves. And part of that is not being policemen of the world. It is time to come home. Bring those forces home. Take a look at Chomsky, though, and Dore. And Chomsky responds to this. Not specifically to this, but Chomsky responds to a question that is going in line with what Dore is talking about here. So let's flip over and let's listen to Dore.
Oh, this is from October 3rd of this year, 2018. And here's what he said. The other crucial quote, this is quoting Chomsky, the other crucial question in the status of the Kurdish areas, Rojava. In my opinion, it makes sense for the United States to maintain a presence which would deter an attack on the Kurdish areas. That's what Chomsky says. Chomsky noted that the Kurds have succeeded in sustaining a functioning society with many decent elements in Syria's north. I'll be honest, I didn't know that. Did you know that? That the Kurds had succeeded in sustaining a functioning society?
As a gold starter myself, I did know that. Not just know that. I've listened to more speeches of Chomsky than anybody should ever really admit to. And I've heard Chomsky talk about this particular topic before for Java. Let Dore finish, though, because he's getting to a point where he's going to disagree.
Society inside Syria's in the north? I didn't know that. Did you know that?
Not until I read this article.
Right,
earlier.
not until I read this article.
Yeah.
The idea that they should be subjected to an attack by their bitter enemies, the Turks, or by the murderous Assad regime, it's funny. You could say that about any regime, any government. They're murderous.
You mean even Obama?
I love that. God, I love that. Now, what I mean by that is that's honesty. When I read an article and I read it and somebody says something like that, I'm like, I think of the same way. If you're a person sitting on the moon looking at events and you say, well, that guy dropped, 26,000 bombs over the course of the last year, yeah, that's murderous. Well, you have, thousands of civilians being murdered in legal wars. Yeah, that's murderous. That's pretty bad. You have another country, or a guy who destroyed a country, Libya. You have another guy who destroyed a country, Iraq. You've been bombing in one country after the next with scant legal protection, let alone moral security and this type of thing. Yeah, it's murderous. I look at it in the same similar terms. I love the fact that he says that. Let's keep going, because when I read that from Chomsky, but Chomsky is well aware that these other governments, or in our own government, acts in a similar way. Chomsky has even responded to stuff like this, saying, the whole point of power is, there's more geostrategic power and that type of thing, meaning anything else is secondary to that aim. If they were using the Kurds for their purposes, yes, they would use the Kurds for their purposes, but not necessarily for Kurdistan, but for their own power ends in that particular region of the world. Let's let Dore finish, though.
Obama regime?
Yeah, what government isn't murder? I don't understand. So that's just weird that he did that. He goes, or by the murderous Assad regime, I think is anything should be done to try to prevent that. So the idea that they should be subjected to an attack by their bitter enemies, the Turks, I think is anything should be done to try to prevent that, he says. Chomsky backed a petition in 2016 condemning military operations in Kurdish cities and called for peace talks between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers' Party.
Now, he's reading this from Kurdistan 24. Back during the time of the Ottoman Empire, the various groups were able to, Iran, Syria, Iraq, all of these things were, for the most part under the same empire, and people could kind of move around in the areas to which they wanted to move around to. When Brits, after World War I and the Ottoman Empire completely collapsed, and Brits redrew those areas into different countries, at this point now they became certain different countries. Turkey looks at the Kurds as being terrorists, even though the United States has looked at them as being allies and one of their main fighting forces against ISIS. So in this situation with the United States pulling out, it leaves them, you could say, susceptible to attack by the Turks. The catch is, though, and Chomsky has responded to this right here. Aaron Matei, a question was asked to Chomsky. Chomsky was sent that question. This is his response. He favors keeping U.S. troops in Syria as a holding operation until the final settlement with Russia and Assad that could guarantee the Kurds' safety. With the United States pulling out now, he argues that all leverage is lost in Turkish assault. So right here, the question is, what deals with Russia, who right now are making cozy deals with Turkey, and a deal with Assad, may mass murder in Syria, would in any event do nothing to deter Turkey? Who can in any event do nothing to deter Turkey? In fact, the longer term, there should be a deal crucially involving Russia and with Assad, with some kind of guarantees for what they are worth to preserve at least limited protection for the Kurds. But that's the longer term. This is now, for now, the sole deterrent to a Turkish assault is a small U.S. contingent confined to Kurdish area as a holding operation for possible longer-term settlement along the lines just indicated. From the standpoint of Chomsky, Rojava being somewhat of a socialist or anarchist commune, yeah, it creates a bias. I think it creates a bias. But regardless, the thought is a small U.S. force in order to stop the Turks from invading. And that with the United States gone, that there is nothing to prevent the Turks from destroying that socialist commune that's essentially a functioning society. Fast forward to now. Right here. The Kurds reached out to Assad, which I guess to some degree was expected since the Turks consider them terrorists. And by the way, I'm not saying the Turks are right. I'm just saying this is what the Turks considers them. Terrorists doesn't really mean anything. It's relative to whoever you're aiming that at. Abandoned by the United States, Syrian Kurds request help from Assad regime. I love the way they always call it a regime. Syrian troops erected the national flag on the outskirts of Manbij, the first time it's flown in the northern town for more than 6 years. The aim is to ward off Turkish offensive, said Ilham Aham, a senior Kurdish official. If the Turks excuse its Kurdish militia, they will leave their posts to the government. A statement released earlier by the Kurdish People's Protection Units, YPG, said they had invited the government forces into the town as they were obliged to protect the same country, nation, and borders. Essentially, in order to prevent a Turkish assault, they've essentially joined forces with Assad, or the Syrian forces. YPG fighters still based there are part of the United States-backed Syrian Defense Forces alliance battling ISIS. The town has been governed for the last 2 years by the Manbij Military Council, which is allied to the SDF. It is the first major concession by the Kurds to Bashar al-Assad regime since the YPG seized control of the swaths of north and east of Syria and created an area of self-rule, which one analyst has called a major turning point. If Chomsky's biggest issue here was that those forces were going to be wiped out, well, it seems that they've made a deal, at least in the short term, to try to ensure that they remain intact. Now, whether that means that they maintain self-rule, that's a secondary question. But I'm just saying, if Chomsky's main thing is there needs to be a small military force in order to prevent these forces from being wiped out by Turkish assault, then it seems that they've made a deal to prevent themselves from being wiped out with a Turkish assault. In which case, we can take our ass home. We can leave. Throw a parade. Call it a day. We don't have those anymore. These big military parades saying welcome home. have a big military parade saying welcome home, but get our troops out there. We should fight like hell to prevent this privatization of war, in a sense, where you have these kind of private contractors going out doing the job that the military was doing. We need to come home entirely, but at the very least, as a start, bring it home. In this, because I have other videos that I want to do. Wow, we spent 36 minutes on this. All right. If you enjoyed the content, let me make sure I haven't missed anyone first. Perhaps to solve the problem of the Kurds, we need to wait. God, that trips me out. That's funny to me. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the Patreon. Thanks all.